This week on a bonus episode of the Baseline Podcast, we are joined by James Yoder, the host of Michigan Football Report, and we are super excited to talk about more Michigan football, what he thinks of the state of Michigan football. Does he see it as a good way they're going or a bad way? And we also talk about what he thinks is the biggest factor for them this upcoming season. All that and so much more coming up on the Baseline Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Baseline Podcast. It's like a bonus episode again this week, but we're back. I'm Ben. That's Josh. I'm wearing my Ohio State stuff because I was going to get caught red-handed twice. But Josh, we have another special guest this week. Who do we got? And let's get us going.
Yeah, this week we have James Yoder from the Michigan Football Report at Chat Sports. He's an excellent guy to watch on YouTube, very entertaining. Also one of the best Twitter accounts that I follow. James, welcome to the show. How are you doing today, man?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the kind words. Hope I live up to those expectations.
Oh, I think you definitely will. But we brought you on because we want to talk a little bit more Michigan football. Ben's got the Ohio State jersey on, so I'll act as a referee if I need to here, make sure we don't get too heated. But this last season was one of the best ones Michigan's had in a while, something that was definitely special for the fan base, a lot of seniors. It all kind of just came together. So I imagine for you as a Michigan fan, that was really exciting to watch. What were your thoughts on the way last year went?
Yeah, I mean, wild season compared to expectations. You're coming off 2-4, and just a disaster of a season in 2020 with COVID, and quarterback play was terrible. And I think across the board, you had guys sitting out like Nico Collins and some other ones. And so it caught everybody by surprise, but I think it was pretty clear from probably the second game against Washington that this was a different team, and maybe Jim Harbaugh is a different guy. I kind of equated it during the season to sometimes when you're like at your lowest point, whether it's in life, at work, anywhere, it's just kind of like there's nothing to lose. And so, what are we going to do here? And I think Michigan kind of played with Harbaugh, at least, like they're going to fire me anyways if I go 7-5 or worse. So might as well just do what I want to do. And I think, some of that played out with how they approached the season from an offensive perspective and went back to what a lot of Michigan fans thought they would get from Harbaugh early on, which is a very heavy running game, which we, never really saw in the first 6 years.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that Washington game. I actually was in attendance for that. That was the first time I'd ever been to the Big House. I tried to get to like a lot of the bigger college football stadiums around where I live in Northeast Indiana. And it was actually the day of I planned I was going to make the trip up there just because ticket prices were really good. It was the night game. It was Washington. So it just sounded like it was a perfect night to go and attend Michigan up there at the Big House for the first time. But I'm curious about your Michigan fandom. Can you give us a little bit of background on that? Because I think you are located in Texas, if I remember correctly. So did you grow up in the Ann Arbor area at all?
No, I grew up in actually Cleveland area, in Ohio as well, in the country. But my dad's whole side of the family is from Southeast Michigan, and he huge Michigan fan. He's had season tickets. There's a couple year blip in there, but for nearly 50 years now, like the 70, maybe like it is 50 years, 71, 72 seasons, something like that. I think there was a blip in the early 90s where he didn't have him for 4 or 5 years, but and then had a few family members from attend Michigan. I went to the University of Toledo, but I always approach people like, how do you become a Michigan fan in Ohio? Well, you've got family from Michigan, a dad who's a diehard, you go to a ton of games. But also I grew up in, the late 90s, early 2000s. And when I was in, 5th grade, 6th grade, 10th grade, Michigan was winning every year. So it actually kind of became a little bit of a battle cry to be able to brag, when you're in 7th grade that I root for Michigan and they just beat Ohio State again. Luckily, I got kind of out of the state of Ohio when the losing, became really bad over the last like 12, 15 years. And I didn't have to deal with Ohio State fans every day. When I was growing up, not a bad thing. And so Chat Sports, though, is headquartered in Texas, in Dallas. We've got a studio. We've got 4 studios downtown Dallas, and expanding every little bit. We were trying to add 4 more studios before the football season. So that's why Texas for me.
Oh, wow. So he doesn't. Are we that bad? Are Ohio State fans that bad? I'm just kidding. I know we're bad. Not bad, James.
I think the reputation is on the internet and Michigan fans who've never interacted with Ohio State fans that much, they'll say they're terrible and brutal and awful people. But I actually find Ohio State fans on social media to be fairly engaging. And I went to the 2018 Ohio State Michigan game in Columbus, kind of decked out. I was wearing jeans. It was a cold day, but I had I had a Michigan shirt on, Jordan Michigan zip up. And I was one of the only people in the entire stadium. And I didn't really get that heckled. I actually was more of like kind of, just friendly back and forth and not like people throwing a beer at my head. So I came away with that game with kind of a newfound respect. Like that wasn't that bad. People didn't like heckle me or throw beer at me.
Yeah, we're not too bad.
Yeah. I'd say I think Ohio State fans for the most part are the same way. I'm a Florida fan, James, so not too much to be happy about over there. But I've always had positive interactions with Ohio State fans. That's what most of my friends are. Being an Ohio native myself, the worst I've ever seen Ohio State fans, I guess, is I was actually in attendance 2019, Ohio State at IU, and there was this shouting match between this IU fan, this Ohio State fan. Like they were right in each other's face. It looked like they might throw hands a little bit, but it just kind of ended with the OSU fan throwing double birds up at him, and then he had a couple of his buddies behind him backing up, it looked like, and then it just kind of de-escalated from there. But yeah, always positive vibes with the Ohio State fans from my experience, at least. But kind of transitioning from this past Michigan season to the current offseason, they've been missing out on a couple of these QB prospects like Dante Moore right in their backyard, CJ Carr not only in their backyard in Saline, but also, I mean, the grandson of one of the legendary coaches, Lloyd Carr. And you would really like to see a team that just won the Big Ten championship be able to parlay that success into getting some of these quarterbacks. So talk to me about maybe some of the reasons you think that they've been losing out on these guys and what that could do in the long term.
Yeah, it's, to start off, it's disappointing that you have, for the first time in the recruiting era when people are keeping rankings on the internet going back 20-ish years, Michigan's only had a couple, if any, maybe one or two 5-stars at all, let alone back-to-back classes. I don't know if CJ Carr will end up being a 5-star all in, but to not get either one of them, challenging. Now you go back and you think, well, Michigan switched offensive coordinators. Did that hurt? Josh Gaddis, people say he went to Miami. I don't think he was going to necessarily be invited back. I think he was maybe nudged out the door to go find something else, because I don't think his philosophy worked for the first year and a half, 2 years that they tried to run it. And it was pretty clear to anybody who follows these things closely that it wasn't necessarily him calling all the shots this past season. I don't believe. And so you got that factor. You got Harbaugh on National Signing Day doing an interview with the Vikings in January? Yeah, February, whenever it was. And then from there, you've got the NIL factor, which people want to blame on all this. And maybe that could be part of the case. There's a lot of rumors out there that Dante Moore's parents or uncle, whoever, got jobs at Nike as part of the deal and have an allotment of money so the family can travel to all of his games out there. Okay, cool. But outside of that, the thing that's most concerning to me is that both those schools, Notre Dame and Oregon, that CJ Carr 2024, Dante Moore 23, both my first-year head coaches. So he didn't have any established relationship with them for 4 years since he was in 9th grade, 8th grade, or going back. And it's not like either one of those guys, the longtime OC there, right? Both defensive coaches. So I could have seen if you'd gone to Oklahoma, right? Or maybe not Oklahoma right now. Let's just say USC, right? Or hell, even Ohio State, right? Or LSU, or a school that's got a track record, Alabama, of putting out big name quarterbacks in the NFL over the past 4 or 5 years as we've kind of gone into this. I think like 2018 season until now is like the new era of like the big schools have become the air raid schools, right? Clemson and Ohio State and Alabama and Oklahoma. I would have been okay with that, but given that it's two defensive coaches, on their first year, meaning that they out-recruited Jim Harbaugh in his backyard for a legacy, Lloyd Carr's grandson, and a kid that's been a Michigan fan and has been offered since he just finished his 7th grade year in Dante Moore. Those guys came in and got the job done in 6-7 months in Jim Harbaugh's backyard. That's more concerning than any of the other stuff or NIL or anything like that.
Do you think him go like the really fascinating thing for me is the whole NFL flirtatious thing that he does? It seems like every year. I mean, it seems like Jim Harbaugh. I don't know if it's like him trying to get more money out of Michigan. Like I'm just, for me as an Ohio State fan, I sit back and I try to look at it non-biasedly, like try not to be not biased. But sometimes I'm just like, it's like sometimes I look at it as like a crazy guy. Like he just like, he wants the drama to be associated like every offseason or every season. And I'm trying to figure out, how do you think the fan base, how much longer will they tolerate kind of like this? Oh, I might go to the NFL. Oh, I might do this, but hey, I'm going to lose 2 quarterbacks. Like how much more do they tolerate where they start pushing back and saying, all right, we got to get something other than just winning the Big Ten first time in a long time and beating Ohio State for the first time in a long time?
I'm guessing it'll depend on what had just happened in the prior season. So if they beat Ohio State again this season on the road, a top 2 preseason team, and let's say you win the Big Ten as part of that, go to the playoff back-to-back years, and he flirts the NFL again, I think it'd be more of the same. People will be like, oh, okay, well, he got us back, beat Ohio State. If he's going to go on, cool. Like and then last for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, like it did last year. After like week 2, people be like, okay, make a decision already now. And I think if he were to leave after back-to-back Big Ten, championships, beating Ohio State, he probably would be welcome back as a former coach, alumni, do a little wave at halftime in a few years, something like that. Now, if they lose to Ohio State and it's a bloodbath and he's looking, I think people just people were mostly like throwing up their hands the last couple weeks. And when he went on an interview with the Vikings, like, all right, just take the damn job already. And that's because it just had gone on for so long. And Michigan fans thought they were going to lose out on other coaches. If they lose to Ohio State this year, go 9-3 in the regular season or something like that, I don't think there'll be much, temperature for that amongst the fan base. If he starts looking around, there's rumors, and he doesn't come out and squash them instantly, people were like, just go already, get the hell out of here if you don't want to be here. They'll see it as a sign of hurting the program because of recruiting, like we saw this time maybe. And well, the only reason you're here is because nobody else wants you. Apparently that's what happened last year. So just quit and go look for a job. I think that it'll depend on really what happened in November and into the bowl season, on how much leeway he gets in the fan base.
Yeah. Another reason why, some people might speculate why Michigan didn't get these guys is because Harbaugh really hasn't been able to develop a QB. Like, he's had guys like Shea Patterson come through and Joe Milton, and obviously none of those guys lived up to the hype. But kind of on the flip side, like Dante Moore going to Oregon, I thought was interesting. I didn't even think about the first year coach aspect, but also what kind of quarterbacks has Oregon produced? Like 247 throughout like the top 10 QBs that Oregon's thrown out. And Dante Moore is like going to be the highest rated QB they've ever gotten in the building. And when you go through the top 10, the only one really relevant on that list, at least in terms of making the NFL and stuff, was Dennis Dixon. And Justin Herbert was their 19th ranked QB that they've brought in the house. And after seeing him in the NFL, it looks like Oregon might have actually held him back a little bit with the way that they do things over there. So it makes me wonder if maybe Oregon has like a nice NIL deal kind of in the works for Dante Moore. Is that something that you've heard at all? And do you wish that Michigan would be maybe more active in NIL instead of so stubborn and saying like, we're going to do it the Michigan way and raise Michigan men?
I think that, the Oregon, the Justin Herbert thing is the one you could point to recently. He's had more success than any Michigan quarterback, that was at Michigan recently. Obviously, Tom Brady was there 20 years ago. So I don't know if it really makes a difference because that was under a different coaching staff, right? And that coaching staff, for the most part, is in Miami. And Notre Dame, on the flip side, like, what have they done? But again, they've got a first-year coach who was a defense coordinator there for just 1 year. So neither one of them's got a track record. Now, Tommy Rees was the OC at Notre Dame for a number of years under Brian Kelly. So maybe that's the track record. What I think Michigan needs to do is they're not going to jump out there and you're not going to hear people like, oh, this core 5-star quarterback signed a $10 million NIL deal to go to Michigan, like you're hearing with Miami and Tennessee and others, because I don't think their administration has the stomach to deal with an investigation or sanctions if they do it the wrong way. And so what they need to do is make sure that Cade McNamara, JJ McCarthy, Donovan Edwards, Blake Corum, these kind of stars on offense and maybe even defense, had it been a year ago, not Chase Winovich, Aiden Hutchinson, Daxton Hill, get NIL deals, and they put them in place to get them with either existing sponsors around the program, open up the ability for companies to reach them easily. They kind of roll out this thing where companies can apply to be in their system now to send deals. I don't know how valuable that's going to be or not. But they need to then get the guys this season. It's got to happen this season. Whoever the starting quarterback is, McCarthy, McNamara, starting running back, best receiver, have to come out with some big deals, because Ohio State, you're seeing, oh, wow, CJ Stroud has a deal to get a Bentley, and Travion Henderson has a deal to, he's got an unbelievable, $75,000, $80,000 pickup truck and all that stuff. You haven't seen that from Michigan. You've heard a lot about NIL deals, but nothing too specific that's getting recruits to get excited. And so if they don't play the $9 million to come here for a 5-star quarterback, you've got to come here, compete for a year, or hell, even be the backup like JJ McCarthy, make $500K, because these companies, there's 24 companies will pay you the second you're starting. They want to be in your business. And so I hope that plays out well for them if they're not going to do the pay for play, version. The thing I'm interested to see play out is you've already seen a couple rumors out there of guys getting promised things and then not, the pick wide receiver going to USC. There were some rumors last week about, okay, they made him all these NIL promises when he hasn't seen them yet. And so I bet that bites some schools in the butt. And I think Michigan's trying to avoid that in some regards.
Yeah, I don't think Michigan's going to really try to get involved in like the early recruiting NIL deals, at least. I think they're definitely a big enough school and have a lot of notable alumni that maybe some of the bigger stars on the team that, once they prove themselves, then they might be able to get deals like that. Or maybe even some guys, like you said, JJ McCarthy, he's kind of been doing some things kind of on his own, like running camps and stuff. And he's been paying some of his teammates. So I think that kind of stuff is cool. But speaking of JJ McCarthy and Cade McNamara, like, Michigan kind of has like this QB battle, supposedly, even though McNamara did what he did last year in terms of winning and managing the games, not turn the ball over too much. I mean, he's a Big Ten championship QB, but I think everybody's kind of interested in McCarthy's athleticism, plus how hyped he was as a recruit. Is there actually a battle here, do you think, or is McNamara definitely the guy and this is just all like media talk?
It's interesting that, McCarthy thinking coming back with 3 years of eligibility, Big Ten championship quarterback. Most in history, you'd be like, well, it's a no-brainer. But we all saw what McCarthy could do and maybe what Cade's limitations were last year. So McCarthy missed spring practice, had a shoulder injury. As far as everybody knows right now, he's back to 100%. He's done camps, he's throwing, and he'll be ready for camp when it gets kicked off here in about 2.5 weeks. I would guess right now that with the schedule being so weak to start the year, especially, is that Cade will start and they'll kind of have a Henson Brady, if you guys are even old enough to remember back in the 99 season. One guy plays the first quarter, one guy plays the second quarter for the first 3, 4, 5 games of the year. Whoever played the best gets to start the third and go from there. And if you roll out, I mean, we saw some amazing plays from McCarthy last year. Michigan State game, he had that kind of rollout touchdown pass to Andrew Anthony. He had the 2 deep bombs in scrub time, first game of the year. And I think it was against Wisconsin, both in scrub time to Dalen Baldwin, these deep passes right in stride. And so if he gets a second quarter against the ones of the other team, even if it's Western, if it's Hawaii or whoever it is, I think that you'll be able to, go compare apples to apples. In the past, it seems like it's been mostly apples to oranges. When McCarthy was throwing, it was against the second string for Western Michigan or the third string for Wisconsin in a blowout game, and McNamara was always going against the ones. So if you do have them both going against the ones, then whoever plays the best, I think by the time about the 4th or 5th game of the year, before you get to that Iowa road game, that becomes your guy. I guess it's going to be McCarthy or McNamara is going to start game 1, probably game 2, 3. And McCarthy's going to have to prove that he just can't make that pass once or twice a game, that he can, throw 25 of those per game and do it at a high level without the turnovers that, for the most part, Cade McNamara completely avoided last year.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is you got to somewhat get McCarthy involved enough so that he doesn't transfer, because I imagine that's definitely kind of a scare over on the Michigan end, is that if there's absolutely no chance that he gets to start, then maybe he dips. Do you think there might be a little bit of that?
I think it's pretty clear that whoever wins the job this year, or I should say this, whoever is starting at the end of the year and has the leg up for the 2023 season, the other guy will transfer, right? They both, even though they're 2 years apart as recruits, they technically have the same eligibility, because McNamara redshirted in 2019 and then he got the COVID year in 2020.
That's true,
so
yeah.
He had a third-year freshman eligibility last year, and so he has 3 years to go. And so whoever misses out on the job, I think they'll stick. I don't think anybody's going to dip, in August, because they're the backup, and they'll both stick this season. And then, maybe they go into spring if they both feel like they have it, but I doubt that. I would guess that if I were to guess, no matter what happens, I think after this year, Harbaugh lets them both know that McCarthy, as long as he's living up to the hype, he's our guy. We want to get a full season out of him in 23, maybe 2 if he stays for 4 years. And then McNamara, if he is the starter this year, maybe he goes pro. Who knows, right? I don't think he's much of a pro prospect right now, at least from the mock drafts, et cetera. Or he finds a nice landing spot to a school that, hey, I'm a back-to-back Big Ten championship quarterback, or started a Big Ten champion and then rotational guy for a 10 or 12 win team, and he'll find a nice landing spot for a year or maybe even 2, and be a starter in multiple schools. I would guess that's the case. I don't think Michigan lets JJ McCarthy transfer at all. I think Harbaugh, if the screws were tightened after this year, he would tell Cade it's time to move on or be the backup.
Yeah, that makes sense. So kind of let's transition into more like discussion about the offense as a whole, because I think in terms of offense and defense, Michigan has the most returning talent on that offense. Like guys like Cornelius Johnson, I believe are back. You mentioned Andrell Anthony, Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. Like a lot of the guys that broke out as weapons last year are going to be back. Plus Ronnie Bell, who missed like most of the entire season last year, is going to be back. So having him back is going to be definitely a bonus. What do you think this Michigan offense could be capable of this year?
Well, it depends on who the quarterback is. If it ends up being McCarthy, let's just say 5 games in, right? Let's not guess on the first few games. If it just ends up being McCarthy, they need to throw more, right? Michigan is kind of averaged in the Harbaugh era, like 24 passes a game or something like that, where, Ohio State's throwing 40 plus passes a game, less than blowouts. And I think I saw a stat recently, I may be way off in this memory, but it was like first half passing attempts. Like Ohio State in the Harbaugh era was like 19 first half passing attempts a game versus Michigan's like 10.2 or something crazy like that.
Yeah, that's about right.
Ohio State's passing at 2x the rate, and as such, they're scoring more, getting more possessions, etc. So if you make the switch to McCarthy, you got to kind of say, well, it's because he can throw NFL level passes, and you got to take more shots at being a team like Alabama, Ohio State, et cetera. I think this situation is very similar to Clemson, the year between Deshaun and Trevor Lawrence, right? They had Kelly Bryant come in for the 1 year, led them to the playoff, right? They got crushed by Alabama, and then Bryant came in and started the first 4 games of that next year while Trevor Lawrence was a freshman, and then Lawrence took over in game 5, led him actually to the national title. I think you could see a similar situation like that with Michigan. Once McCarthy's in, though, you got to pass the ball more. You got to, you've got to get 30 to 35 attempts a game, much higher than they are now. From an offensive perspective, outside of the quarterback, I'm really interested to see what Ronnie Bell does coming back. I think Andrell Anthony is a wild card. He showed a lot of potential in 2 or 3 games, but then disappeared for mostly the rest of the season as a true freshman. Roman Wilson, right, was starting most of the season, then kind of got a backup role for a while. So they've got a lot of weapons. You add in AJ Henning at a running back position potentially. They've said, Deebo Samuel role, but Michigan did a really good job, whether it was Josh Gaddis or somebody else calling the plays last year, of getting Donovan Edwards and AJ Henning involved in multiple facets of the game. Edwards caught 10 catches the one game against Maryland out of the backfield as a true freshman, right? And then Henning scored a bunch of touchdowns, and most of his big plays came on those reverses where Michigan's got pulls a couple linemen and a tight end, and he's got 2 or 3 blockers out, and including against Ohio State, scored that first touchdown. So I didn't follow. I don't have the exact stat in front of me, but there was a time, at least going into the Ohio State game. I'm not sure if it continued going into Ohio State and then beyond, but I'm guessing it did. Michigan had the most plays last year in college football, over 50 yards, right? And that's surprising to a lot of people because, wow, they don't have that. But
for sure,
every game you'd have at least 1, if not 2, and they're mostly on runs, but you have Blake Corum taking off for a long run, or you have Henning around the outside, but you also hit a couple of deep passes throughout the season. So I think it'll be explosive offense. And if they're going to beat Ohio State or have a championship college football playoff level season, 11 wins in the regular season type of year, I think their offense will have to be what the defense was last year and carry them with 2 new offensive coordinators. I think it's a question mark.
I know sometimes we look at the Big Ten, and I look at Ohio State, right? And I always say that the toughness wasn't there last year in the trenches. For me as a Ohio State fan, as someone who's grown up watching Ohio State my whole life, if there's anything anybody asks me about Ohio State, I always say that they're tough and in the trenches. My question to you is, how do you see this offensive line shaping out? Do you feel like they can win the point of attack? Do you think they can do that? Because I think we've learned in the Big Ten is if you can win the point of attack, no matter how, maybe bad your defense is, but if you can win the point of attack and you have that chance, you can score a lot of points. Do you think this is an offensive line that can get Michigan to that level where they're going to compete for a Big Ten championship?
I think the question about the offensive line kind of comes down to who you give credit for last year from the running game. Was it Hassan Haskins having a breakout year with 20 touchdowns and 1,400 yards rushing? Or did he do that because of the offensive line? And I don't know if anybody really knows. They've got 3 starters returning. Plus, you've got a guy who's got a ton of reps, a few starts. Plus, you've got All-American level center transferring from Virginia. So a lot of people think, well, you lost your worst offensive lineman on a really good offensive line, Plus, you got a guy who's been there for a while coming in. So 3 starters, plus an All-American level transfer, plus a guy everybody knows can be counted on. So you don't expect a dip from the offensive line from what they're capable of. And so if you get into the 4th week, 5th week of the year, and Michigan isn't churning off 250, 300-yard rushing games, I think it's like, well, Hassan Haskins is a much bigger deal than maybe people give him credit for, because Michigan doesn't have that type of running back this year. Corum is not a going to score 5 touchdowns against Ohio State kind of back, at least, walking up the middle like Hassan did from time to time. And Diamond Edwards, I don't think he's that type of running back either. So either somebody else emerges. There's this second-year player who's this Dunlap is his last name. I can't remember his first name off the top of my head. And they've also got this Khalil Mullings, who is a second-year linebacker who, got running back reps in the spring, that maybe he is the short down back. There's been some chatter around one of these freshman quarterbacks. They've got 2 freshman quarterbacks in this year. Alex Orji is great, taken out of the just taking the direct snap and trying to run. And I don't think that's an offensive strategy, but maybe it gets you a touchdown here or there inside the 5-yard line. So the offensive line is going to come down to, was it Hassan Haskins or was the offensive line? It might be both, but the ground, I coined this term ground rate offense that Michigan had last year, coined by Yoder. I think it is a lot more about Hassan Haskins emerging and finally being like the main guy after 4 years than it was the offensive line just moving people around. They certainly were tough, and the offensive strategy, and they did a lot of the Harbaugh Stanford stuff, pulling guards and pulling the center and opening things up. But I think Hassan had a lot to do with that. So remains to be seen if they can just go for they went for 300 plus yards. Three of the first 4 games last year, and then we're kind of an offensive running juggernaut for most of the year last year, even including Ohio State, until you got to Georgia, who just completely shut them down.
Love that term ground raid, man. I'm hopefully allowed to steal that and use that on my own, but
take it.
I will definitely use that. But before, I just want to wrap up the offensive discussion just with maybe a little bit of that ground raid. So you mentioned Hassan Haskins now gone, and I am with you that Blake Corum definitely can't be that guy that's running between the tackles all the time. And I can remember back to like when I first started watching college football, Michigan's always had like one big back, whether it's like Chris Perry or Brandon Miner, Mike Hart, and then Hassan Haskins was that guy last year. Right now, we're looking at like Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards, and you mentioned Henning. How do you think that they are going to run the ball this year? You think they might get a little bit more creative, do a little bit more versus stuff outside, or do you think that they might actually maybe move to that pass game a little bit more?
Well, I mean, we don't know necessarily what Diamond Edwards is as a running back. He got so few attempts, being like the number 3 guy as a top 50 recruit last year. So I think he's as known of a commodity as he is. He's still kind of an X factor because you didn't see him carry the ball 15 times a game. So can him and Corum become that version? And Edwards is a little bit bigger than Corum. Can he take some of those 3rd and 2s and get first downs? And if not, then Michigan by default kind of turns into more of a non-ground rate offense. They've got to pass the ball. They've got to pass on 3rd and short from time to time, because when they know you're running and you're running, it doesn't turn into first downs. It turns down into stops. So I think Diamond Edwards is an interesting one to keep an eye on. But where I do think Michigan did a good job last year across the board is they called passes to running backs at the right times, which Jim Harbaugh had never done in his career at Michigan. It was always like they never throw screens. They never throw a little kind of running back fake blocks and comes out. Hell, not even a wheel route. And they did a ton last year. And they also even when it seemed obvious, they did a really good job at the end around or reverses to allow them to AJ Henning. Or if you guys can recall, if you watched a bunch of Michigan games last year, Michigan kind of made the flea flicker to Haskins part of the offense. Then they did like 5 or 6 of them throughout the year. Haskins takes the handoff, started to toss it back, and they go long. And I think they converted on every single one of them that they did throughout the year. It went for like a 25+ yard gain. I think specifically they did one against Ohio. The Ohio State one was Henning came on the fake reverse, and then he kind of went around the outside and they passed it back to him. That's what it was. So if they do that, you can catch the offensive, the defensive line, linebackers off guard a little bit more. They can't always, that, hey, this is Haskins off left tackle. We know that's coming, or Corum now this year. And so they did a pretty good job of that last year. New offensive philosophy, or I guess coordinator, will that continue? I think remains to be seen.
Yeah, so So moving over to the defensive side of the ball now, I mean, a lot of superstars over there, guys like Daxton Hill and Aiden Hutchinson, David Ojabo, but a lot of those guys on that defense are gone now. So how many more guys are going to have to step up this year? How many guys do they got returning? Like, is there enough on this Michigan defense that it can still be serviceable and maybe even like better than what people expect?
They've certainly got talent, and I'm really excited about a player named Junior Coulson, who was a 4-star linebacker, started 6-7 games last year as a true freshman, came in and took a redshirt freshman who had gotten the start early on and took his role. So I think he's kind of the breakout guy. If you look at Michigan film, the last 3 or 4 games, let's take the Georgia game out, but Ohio State and Iowa and a couple of games prior to that, he started to look a lot to me like Devin Bush. Like you would not necessarily recognize his number. Okay, who's 25 again? And you're just like, hey, it's not a big name player. You see this blur of blue go across the screen. Like, whoa, who's that guy? Oh, boom, it's Junior Coulson again, just flying all over the place. So I'm excited to see about him. I think he's probably, in my opinion, the guy on the defense that is most likely to be a first-round pick in the future. He's still got 2 more years to go. He's only a true sophomore. Will Johnson in the secondary, true freshman. I bet he starts right off the gate, right out of at least starts in a 5 a player, a nickel set at worst. But I think he starts right out of the gate. Michigan was hurt by a couple. Vincent Gray, the cornerback, Chris Hinton, the defensive tackle, both left multiple years of eligibility on the table. Neither one of them got drafted, so I think it was a bad decision. So the defensive line is where Michigan is going to struggle in some way. They've got Mozzie Smith as the only returning starter, pretty 330-pound defensive tackle out of the state of Michigan. But then they've got a lot of players who have had limited or no playing time who will be in the 2 deep, and that's going to be a big question. Last year, it was such a revelation from Michigan defense that you kind of under Don Brown, you almost got sick of the style he played. Under Mike McDonald last year, you could almost guarantee the quarterback was going to get pressured. After the first couple of games, like, wow, who the hell is this Ojabo guy? You didn't even think he was going to be a starter this year. Ojabo and Hutchinson brought something different, and then they mixed in, corner blitzes, linebacker blitzes. So the defensive line's got to be the focus. The secondary is going to be okay. The linebackers have their playmakers. What are you going to do with 3 new starters in the defensive line? And if you ask me, James, who are the guaranteed day 1 starters, guaranteed final game starters of the defensive line, I don't think I could tell you with any level of certainty. Everyone's got their early post-spring depth chart guys you can point to, but I think they'll rotate 8 to 10 guys in over the first half of the season and hopefully find 4 players or so that work, or potentially 3. I think what they did last year was interesting. One last point in the defense is it was really like almost like a 2-5-4 defense in a lot of ways, because Hutchinson and Ojabo almost the entire year were on the outside with their hand up as outside linebackers. And so Michigan really only had 2 guys with their hand down in the dirt, the 2 interior guys last year. So I think it gives them some flexibility if they keep that style with the new DC to not always have a true defensive end there coming off the edge. They can mix in linebackers, pull on some safeties if they don't feel they have the talent on the defensive line to get a consistent pass rush.
I think that's important that you just play to, I guess, the strengths of your defense. But I feel like another default might be just that, Michigan always seems to develop really good defensive linemen like Ojabo and Hutchinson this year, Rashad Gary, Brandon Graham, Chase Winovich. Like they just always seem to have that guy that can pressure the quarterback. Like that's just something that Michigan always does. But I know you said you couldn't really make any predictions, but anybody in the spring game, maybe that stood out to you. I know you mentioned Mozzie Smith as a guy that's coming back.
Yeah, let's see. Spring game was a very, Michigan spring games are always kind of boring, unfortunately. And McCarthy didn't play in it, so you didn't really get a true offense versus offense comparison. There's a player, and I don't want to mess his name up because I think it's Davis Warren. I was going to say Warren Davis. Davis Warren, who's going to be a second-year player. This year quarterback. Now he's a walk-on, but he got injured in high school, came to Michigan as a preferred walk-on. He looked great, actually. But I don't think he's going to play this year, but it could be one down the line if McCarthy leaves after 23. You give this walk-on that could, get into the fray. But overall, on offense, I expect Donovan Edwards to emerge and end up being like the star of this, even over Blake Corum to be the star of the offense this year. I don't think he'll carry the ball 20 plus times a game, but I think he'll carry 12 times a game on average. Sometimes he'll get 15, 18, sometimes a little less, but I think he'll start catching 3 to 5 passes out of the backfield, and that'll be a big impact. So on offense, Donovan Edwards, I think, will end up being the best player on this team from an offensive perspective. Defense, I said Junior Coulson already. DJ Turner came on last year, ended up being a starter, unseated, a returning starter by midseason, and he became a pretty good player. I thought he did a really good job even against like Ohio State at the end of the year with all their wide receivers. So I think he's the guy who has a potential to break out this year as like an all conference first team, second team player in the secondary for Michigan.
So my question is with that is then, I don't know if Josh is going to touch on this. He might touch on this. He usually does. What do you think would be an overall goal for Michigan, or like when it comes to wins, when it comes to the result in the game, which I'm really interested to hear you say as well. What do you think will be the kind of that prediction for you?
With the schedule being as weak as it is, which admittedly it's a very weak schedule, I think if Michigan goes into the Ohio State game with more than one loss, it is considered a disappointing season, right?
Yeah.
I think everyone wants to beat Ohio State. We'll see what happens. They certainly have more name talent returning with all the guys on offense and the big three with Henderson and Stroud and Jackson, Smith, and Jigba. So they're expected to win the game. And I think the early point spreads are 14, 15 points, which kind of seems wild given that Michigan just won by 15. But Michigan's key components, Haskins and Hutchinson and Ajabo, and Dax Hill aren't there anymore. So I understand it in some regards. You lose more than one game going to Ohio State, I think the season becomes very disappointing because if you lose in Ohio State, okay, cool. Then I've got 3 losses or maybe more. And then Michigan always seems to lose the bowl game under Harbaugh. So what are you looking at, a 4-loss season if you go into the Ohio State game and you lose that? So if you go into the Ohio State game and you're top 6, 7 in the country with 1 loss or less, I think people would say, as long as it doesn't turn out to be 2018-19 Ohio State, which is 30, 40-point blowouts with Ohio State scoring on every possession, you're pretty happy with the season, and you're really excited about the following season because in 23, all that defense is built up and you've got all kinds of guys. Corum could go pro, but Edwards and McCarthy and Andrell Anthony and some other receivers that we mentioned earlier are all going to return for that season as well. So I think if Michigan lives up to expectations, which has been questionable under Harbaugh, you're excited about the future, even with what the recruiting is looking like right now.
It's gonna be good.
Yeah. So just to kind of wrap that up, we had Chris Drew on from Minister Sports a couple of weeks ago, and he was confident enough to say that Ohio State's going to go undefeated and win the national championship. Do you feel like you know enough about this Michigan team to make a prediction yet, or would you like to see maybe how that defensive line and maybe some stuff in the spring with the quarterback situation go before making a prediction for record and like the championship and stuff like that?
So I will predict they'll go 10-1 into Columbus. Now, I don't want to get ahead of my skis here and say, they're going to go in and beat Ohio State in Columbus like they haven't done in 22 years. I think that's a little crazy to say. I think they have a chance, and I will question CJ Stroud, right? He looks good in the Ryan Day offense. He looked great against, the running back playing cornerback again for Utah in the Rose Bowl where they had their entire secondary out. Sure, I could throw for 500 yards against, the rec team secondary. That's never lasts. But I joked about this throughout the month of November when it led up to, it was pretty clear Michigan, Ohio State would be, 2 1-loss teams playing for the Big Ten, playing for a shot in the Big Ten championship and the playoff. I said, look, he's from California. The state of Ohio has had, I think, two players in history had started a game who were California recruits versus Michigan. They both lost. And I said, look, if the weather is cold in Ann Arbor, you can go back to the videos on YouTube, the week leading up to the game, 2 weeks prior, that he has never thrown a competitive pass in below 35 degrees in his life. High school, maybe in middle school, I don't even know, but never in high school, certainly not in college to that point. And people will say, he threw for 360, 400 yards against Michigan. He did great. I think he actually played pretty pedestrian against Michigan. He was bailed out by a few legendary catches by 3 first-round wide receivers to keep a few drives alive. And when it came down to scoring at the end, he didn't get it done. So I'm interested to see from Stroud. I'm not going to crown him the first pick and a Heisman winner until I see him play in cold weather multiple times and get the win. And if it's 30 degrees or below in Columbus in November, which is not always the case, I'll take Michigan just off of what I thought Stroud proved to us, which is he just never played in cold, and it's a whole different ball game when it's 24 degrees and there's snow on the ground. So I'm hoping for the cold in Columbus.
Sounds good. So I know that we are nearing that time that you got to take
Yeah.
off. So I just want to ask you one more question about maybe the Big Ten as a whole, maybe even becoming a super conference. They just added USC and UCLA. I think that was kind
Crazy.
of in response to the SEC getting Oklahoma and Texas. Do you think this could be where college football is going? Do you think the Big Ten SEC could eventually be like an AFC, NFC like we see in the NFL? Or how do you think that about the direction of college football right now?
I mean, I don't love it from a tradition perspective. The Big Ten, they've always been in lockstep with the Pac-10, Pac-12, and clearly that's not the case anymore. They stuck together with the 90s about making sure the Rose Bowl had significance, and the Bowl Alliance and the CFP, the different rotation. And now, for all reasonable intents and purposes, the Rose Bowl doesn't mean anything anymore, right? Because who's going to really, does it really matter if it's a non-playoff teams? And now USC, who is the Ohio State or the Michigan of the Pac-12, they're not there anymore. So what does that really matter? So a lot of tradition has gone out down the drain, which I don't necessarily like. I will be disappointed in just the greater good of college football if some schools, like a lot of the remaining Big 12 or the Pac-12 schools, if they just get left behind, where they've got no conference, so they've got to kind of drop down a level. So I hope it turns into, if this is the way we're going, that at least there's three super conferences, because Big Ten, SEC, that's fine, but you'll leave a lot of schools out, right? We're those going to have 20 each, so you've got 40 schools. You also have 25 Power 5 teams or so now that get left out. So I'm hoping the ACC, Big 12, Pac-12 can kind of figure out some new world order on their own perspective, where you get Clemson, Florida State, Miami to maybe team with the best teams, the Big 12, the best teams, the Pac-12 that are left, maybe a nationwide super conference. That would be interesting, because if it just becomes NFL light, I don't know. The NFL is already there. I liked all the quirkiness of the different conferences and the different styles of play, and I don't necessarily want it to turn into just whoever wins this 30 team conference, they go to the college Super Bowl or something like that. That would kind of kill some of the luster and allure of college football for me.
Yeah, me and Ben lean more on the traditional side too. We love how intense the regular season is, the rivalries, some of those quirkiness, as you said. But yeah, it looks like the Pac-12 might end up being like, if Oregon and Washington end up leaving, they might end up being like the Mountain West and have to drop a level, as you said in your Dante Moore breakdown I watched on YouTube. But thank you, James, for joining us.
One more thing to add with that.
Yeah.
So I wanted to add this a minute ago. If the Big Ten does decide to explore and add teams, I don't think it should just be, we're going to take the name teams from the remaining Pac-12, Oregon and Washington and whoever. I think it should be like, if you're going to California, go nationwide. I think they should go for it. I think Stanford, for a few reasons. If they got Notre Dame, that's a rivalry thing. Okay, Stanford, Notre Dame, you've got the Northern California, Pacific Northwest. I'm kind of indifferent about Oregon and Washington, whatever, but then go for teams that align with the Big Ten. I think North Carolina, I think Virginia would actually be an interesting one. I think Duke would be an interesting one. So you've got 5 or 6 teams there with Notre Dame that you add them, you get to 20 or 22. Then you've got that nationwide conference that probably has more talent than West Virginia. They can stay in the Big 12. That has more talent than the SEC does, at least now, until the SEC decides to add a few more schools. If you added, some of the schools I just mentioned.
Yes, some of those schools you mentioned are definitely like, they have the academic standards that the Big Ten loves, so that those would make sense. But yeah, thank you for joining us, James. Definitely a fun conversation we had today. Where can people find you on social media, if you don't mind sharing your Twitter and YouTube and all that good stuff?
Yeah, just at James Yoder, JamesYoder on Twitter. Also, youtube.com/Michigan TV, all one word. Or check out Chat Sports. We've got 30 shows, 28 YouTube channels at youtube.com/Chat Sports TV.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much, James. We appreciate it. Go Bucks. I'm just sorry. But thank you so much for jumping on. We appreciate it. Hopefully you have a great start to the new football season. I'm sure everyone will check it out. So thank you for coming on, and we'll see you next time. Maybe again. Who knows?
Appreciate it, guys. Thanks.
See ya. Thank you, James, for being on the podcast. We appreciate that. And we thought we'd follow up the little interview we had with him with some of our thoughts on the last few guests we've had, especially both David and James, who are obviously Michigan guys. They're Michigan guys at the core. So we thought we'd talk about that. So Josh, what are some things that have stuck out with you with James and some of the things that he said and what you would like to talk about?
Yeah, first off, it's kind of interesting that I mean, you can have a lot of different opinions within a fan base, but it just goes to show, that one guy that you see on the internet doesn't speak for like a whole fan base. Like there's diversity in there. There's some guys that might tend to be a little bit more delusional, some guys that might be a little bit more realist. Definitely sounded like James had a little bit more concerns than David Cohn did, at least with the recruiting situation that Michigan's in right now. Like I believe the 2022 class is ranked in the top 10, but that 2023 is like down in either the high 40s or like lower 30s. And they've been missing out on these quarterbacks. And that's definitely seems like more of a concern on James' end than David's end.
Yeah. And I think it's very fascinating. I think you talked about, you've mentioned it before, that we can't just rely on one person or one expert or all these different things, right? It's all the results are what matters, right? And I think it's very interesting though to hear David, right, when we talked to him a few days ago, like he's so like so positive. Like I think the most positive Michigan fan I have been around, I think, in a really long time, or at least the one that I've heard that's very optimistic. And I almost, not that I think, and James had also some amazing points, and you see kind of his hesitancy. There we go. But the one thing about David is though he's been in that locker room, and so I think he has that like, okay, he sees something that maybe we don't see, right? That maybe there's something that we don't see that he kind of is like, yeah, I just have this feeling that it's going to be a very good year. Obviously, we'll see what happens when we get to the Ohio State game, and maybe we'll have him on again, and we'll talk about that, but. It is interesting to see the differences between from expert to expert, two guys who study Michigan really well. And they have kind of different opinions, but at the same time, they both agree on a couple of things as well. The Jim Harbaugh situation, for instance, like kind of similar opinions about that. So yeah, it is very fascinating.
Yeah, the schedule too, like James admitted that the schedule is easy, and I don't think anybody would argue that it's going to be hard. Like you going through here, like they're starting off with Colorado State, Hawaii, UConn, Maryland. Like
that
should be 4-0 right there.
Easily.
Then you get to 2 road games with Iowa and IU. Like we saw Michigan blast Iowa in the Big Ten championship last year. So I wouldn't think that that's anything of concern. IU's been kind of at the bottom here last year. So that should be an easy win despite it being on the road. But then you get to the middle here and you do get these 2 games at home, Penn State and Michigan State. I imagine that is where James would say that maybe that one loss going into the Ohio State game happens. I mean, having to play both of those teams back to back is definitely a challenge. But then again, I think a lot of people are higher on Penn State than I am right now. They really have been down in the dumps the last 2 years from what they, I guess, expect to be at.
Well,
right?
It's even, I think Penn State's been that way ever since, I think I heard on, what was it? It was on Menace to Sports where they were talking about since the 2017 game, right? The game where JT Barrett kind of came out and they had that really crazy comeback, right? And I think ever since then, I feel like Penn State hasn't been the Penn State. Like they get to the big games, they lose. They get to a bigger game, they lose. And so they say that could be a tough game. But if I'm a Michigan fan, I'm looking at this schedule and going, we should easily have 0 losses going to the Ohio State game. Like if you're saying what James has said about the talent, what David has been saying, raving about the talent, then you can't tell me that they should not be walking into the Ohio State game with a unblemished record, right? Like the only game because of rivalry, Michigan State's the only game where I sit there and go, okay, maybe you slip up because the rivalry game, you got that. But even then I'm like, Rutgers, Nebraska, Illinois, that's, if you don't win those games, then Jim Harbaugh better be fired, right? Like those are the games you can't lose.
Those last 3 that you just said definitely should be wins too. And then to kind of touch on Michigan State, last year they were at Sparty and Kenneth Walker rushed for 5 touchdowns and they ended up beating Michigan by 4 points. So it was a close game last year. Michigan State, I don't know what all they're going to have returning. They definitely need to get that quarterback situation figured out, though, for sure. And I don't know who's coming in to fill in that running back spot for Walker, but I imagine it's going to be tough to match what Walker did last year. I thought he should have been a Heisman candidate, best running back in all college football, in my opinion.
He got banged up, though. He got banged up, and that shows you if you rely too heavy on the running game, it's going to bang you up, and unless you have that flexibility, I think missing that quarterback was a huge bummer for them.
Yeah. So, I mean, we definitely could see Michigan roll into that Columbus game undefeated. But if they were to have a loss, I would assume it's going to be either this Michigan State or Penn State game. So, yeah, that I got to agree with James on that. At least one loss is what I would expect. And if it's more, then I mean that kind of sucks.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see like the game of the century again, right? I would love to see a 1-2, Ohio State versus Michigan. I would love to see that. Do I think it's going to happen? No. I look at, Michigan's schedule. Michigan seems to always have that bump in the road before they get to Ohio State. And it's weird. It's like the last few years since Harbaugh's been there, there's always that one game that you're like, oh, they should win this game. But then they don't. And so I'm really interested to see if there is that game this year. If not, then okay, I'm wrong. But personally, for the rivalry's sake, I would love to see a 1-2 or a 2-3. And it defines everything. I would love to see that.
Yeah. I mean, Nebraska almost was that game last year. I mean, It was a really fun game to watch. I remember watching on TV. It was at night, I believe, at Nebraska as well. And Michigan ended up winning that game by 3. But that Nebraska team also was kind of interesting because they were playing all these like top 25 games. And I mean, they finished with 3-9, but all their losses were like single digit points. And it was like this team very easily could have been like, a 10-2 team, but they ended up being 3-9. So, I mean, Nebraska, I guess, if there was a game on this schedule that maybe could be like that hiccup, maybe it's that one, just because Ohio State is 2 games after that one. Maybe they're looking a little too far ahead, but that again, I think the Penn State, Michigan State having to go back to back there, maybe one of those ends up being that loss.
Yeah.
But another thing, I know you kind of want to talk a little bit more about Stroud, but I think James' criticism of Stroud was legit, not having the experience into the cold weather that maybe some of these other QBs have. But I mean, we've talked about it multiple times. I think that CJ will be the best QB. I think talent wise, he has like all that arm talent. But obviously last year he had some flaws. Like he's got to get that toughness up. He's got to be able to play in the cold, because I imagine in the NFL, he's going to be playing in a lot more cold weather than what he typically has been, being in Cali and stuff like that. So I guess these are just things that I assume are going to happen, but then again, you never know. Do you want to make any kind of a comment on that?
I don't know. Like I get it. It's the daily routine of being a Ohio State fan, right? There's always one player on your team that you think's amazing, or that, but no, in all reality, he did say some things that are very true. Like Stroud did not necessarily play the greatest game of his life against Michigan, we hear the term bailed out, and yeah, maybe he did, but I mean, we talked off air, like it's 11 players on the team. Like you're going to have throws that are going to need to be caught crazy, right? Or you're going to have to hand it all the ball off, or your lineman make an amazing block to get you a space or whatever. So it's more than just Stroud, right? It's not that I think Ohio State's going to go undefeated and win the national title because of just Stroud. They have, in my opinion, a top 3 running back in the country. And in my opinion, they have the best wide receiver in the country. They have very good offensive line. I think it's going to be a lot tougher offensive line than last year. We talked to Chris about that. We know that. But I also think the defense is going to be a lot better. I think a lot of people keep saying, well, is he going to have time to do it? I mean, if a coach is getting paid this much money, cannot at least get something figured out that's better than last year in the months that he has, then we should just fire him, right? Like, I believe that the reason why I believe this Ohio State team will go ahead and win this, and I haven't said this about a team, I don't think a Ohio State team ever. I've always said, like, hey, they have a chance to run the table. They have a chance to go 14-1, 13-1 and run the table. But I have never said, even in 2020 during that shortened season when they had that opportunity, even then, I didn't believe that they could get it done because I didn't feel like they were ready. This is a team that was too early last year. This is the team this year that I truly believe can go undefeated, that can run the table. And I believe, and I truly believe this, that they will go out and win the national title. I just know how Ryan Day thinks, and I know how much anger this frustrated the Buckeye team for the comments that Michigan said, for the comments that have been said at the Heisman Trophy ceremony. Like, people don't realize words stick. And in the football locker room, I've been in a football locker room as a coach. Trust me, I know what we posted on that board in high school. I know what we put on the whiteboard in high school. You put things that are said by the media. This is a Ohio State team that everyone should be scared of. And I'm not talking just offensively. I'm talking defensively as well.
Yeah, I think we are going to see a lot of tension. I mean, Ohio State's two most important games in the regular season are that first one with Notre Dame, that last one with Michigan, and we've been seeing kind of a little bit of trash talking going. I know that you don't really like some of the stuff that Marcus Freeman's saying. I know that there's a lot of Ohio State guys like Al Washington, James Laurinaitis also on that coaching staff. So it's definitely going to be a game that both sides care about and got circled up. And then kind of on the flip side too, Michigan, like some of the stuff that Harbaugh has said about like being born on third base and like stuff like that. But I remember listening to an interview Blake Corum did on Bussin' with the Boys talking about how in his Michigan career, I mean, he's going into his junior year and they still haven't lost to Ohio State yet. Granted, he's only played them once. It hasn't been twice, but I mean, he can still say that, I guess.
But this is my thing though, with Jim Harbaugh, I'm like, dude, you are the chosen child, right? Like you're like the guy, you're the Michigan guy coming back and you can't beat Ohio State. It took you this long. Like there's not about third base. Yeah. Okay. It was handed to him, but dude, I'm sorry that you had Brady Hoke and Rich Rodriguez to follow. Like you don't have anybody handing it off to you that has built a culture. Like to me, I don't know. Like I just feel like Michigan, not necessarily Michigan fans. I think Michigan fans in general are very cautious about this, but I'm talking about the players. The players seem very like, hey, we just won the Super Bowl. And it's like, dude, you beat Ohio State first time in like 8 years. Like,
yeah.
dude, like, what are you like? The last time you beat Ohio State was when we had an interim head coach. Like that shows me that there is some issues that, okay, you figured out one time. Show me you do it twice, then I'll be more willing to say like, okay, this is back to a very good rivalry and a dynasty.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. The team seems definitely more optimistic, maybe than the fan base does. James still has some questions that he said he's going to need answered about that defensive line, and also wants to know who's going to be playing quarterback. David Cohen also mentioned like let's talk a little bit maybe about before the game happens. So hopefully we can make that happen. But I mean, hopefully, and I know even on the Ohio State side, like you guys want Michigan to be back because you want
100%.
this rivalry to happen. You don't want. I mean, you don't want Clemson to be your rival, right? Like you want that Michigan game to mean something.
Chris. Chris, no. Yeah, Chris Drew, no.
And that's something that like our last few guests, like even Joe, like we just had Joe DiTullio on, and David seems to be for the tradition of college football, and James seems to be for the tradition of college football. Like,
I mean, David
and everything that makes
Ohio.
it different from the NFL.
I mean, David even was saying Ohio. You know how much that just drove me insane the whole episode. Okay, you have no idea.
Yeah, but the tradition like of college football, we love that, and we hope that this Michigan Ohio State rivalry gets restored.
Yeah, I mean, I do, and I think that's what makes college football. Like, what do you, Josh? What do you think? Like, putting aside that you know nothing, like you're not a fan of any team, but when you think of college football, what do you think of? What are some of the games that you think of?
Like, I mean, right off the top of my head, like some of the, I guess those New Year's Six bowls. Like, I mean, there's been so many good like Rose Bowls, and I can remember some like heck of a bunch of great Fiesta Bowls. And then I probably think about the rivalries between like Ohio State, Michigan, and Alabama, and Auburn,
Florida State,
Florida State. That's
Miami, Florida State, Miami, like all
exactly.
these
And then
things.
out west, like USC and UCLA, and Oregon State, the Civil War, like all these rivalries.
And what I'm saying about that is like, that's what the Ohio State Michigan game to me matters, right? Like people ask me, why do I stay up? I'm here in Hungary. Why do I stay up until 12 o'clock, 1 a.m. to watch Ohio State football games? Why do I stay up that late to watch the Ohio State Michigan game? Because that to me is what I grew up on. It's the tradition. It's waking up on a Saturday morning, watching College Game Day, feeling the cool breeze of the fall outside through the window, and being pumped to watch Ohio State football. That's what Ohio State versus Michigan. And I know we were joking before. What did I think about all these Michigan people on the last few weeks? You know, it's hard, right? All right? You know, it's been hard the last few episodes to keep my mouth shut, to kind of just be professional. And I think part of that is just, it's the rivalry, right? It's the tradition. And you asked me like, what did I feel, right? Like when David was on, I was more like kind of like an awe because he works at Daily Wire. Like, okay, I was like, okay, that one was a little more like, then he started dropping the Ohio thing. And I was just like, okay, this is frustrating me. But no, in general, I think if you're an Ohio State fan and you come in contact with a Michigan person, the first thing you think of is the rivalry. Like here in Budapest, in Hungary, we were walking in the Great Market Hall, downtown Budapest, tons of markets. I see a guy sitting in a chair, eating like some langos, and then with a Michigan shirt on. I'm in Budapest, Hungary, and the first thing that came to my mind was that it's an Ohio State football game that's coming up very soon, and you're very proud to wear that Michigan shirt, because I haven't seen a lot of those here in Europe, but not until this year. Until this year is when I started seeing more and more come over. And So it is one of those things that you will always have when you're in this rivalry. You know, you grew up in Ohio, you know how passionate people can get. But I also think I loved what James said, that not every fan is obnoxious. I think Ohio State, Michigan fans, on both sides get this like, people assume that we're just this very like biased, we don't really think outside the box. But if you really honestly talk to us, we're very like upset about our own team sometimes, right? Like, I know you hear that from me. Like, I get really angry.
I feel like Michigan and Ohio State fans tend to be the biggest self-critics of their teams. And
exactly,
it's like with Nick Saban at Alabama, like everybody like laughs at him for talking about how bad they are after they just blasted a team 48-0. And it's like, well, because he sees that there are some flaws, that they are not where they need to be to like win the big one. And I think Michigan and Ohio State fans tend to be the same way.
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to that rivalry. And that's why I think it again, to really finish up, is like the tradition of football is, I'm scared that we're losing it. Like, I'm scared that the tradition of college football is going to go down the drain, that money has become more of an important thing, that what happens in the marketing world, the media world, if, oh dear Lord, if Disney gets a hold of one of these conferences, what are they going to do to it? Right. You're going to turn to a TV series on Disney Plus. I don't know. Right. So that's what scares me. Right. Is just, I fear the losing of tradition, the USC versus Ohio State, the old rivalry, right? The USC UCLA rivalry, the Notre Dame Michigan, the Notre Dame Ohio State that hopefully will come this year, right? Will we have these rivalries in 2 years? Will the Ohio State Michigan game happen every year? If that doesn't happen every year, like you heard David say, he was very upset that the Michigan game didn't happen during that COVID year. As you know me, I said this, I was very angry that they said they couldn't field a team. I'm sorry. It's a rivalry game. If it was against Illinois, okay, I understand. This is the rivalry game. You're going to chicken out? I hold Harbaugh for that game. Like, it might not have been his decision, but like, we know that there is influence that can be made when it comes to football games. But I'm just saying.
Yeah, I think, there were some reports coming out that maybe Michigan lied about some tests, or like just the way that the series of events unfolded. It was like, okay, this isn't adding up. And then there's also like, why can't we just push this game back a week or something like that? Like,
seriously,
to make it happen. But yeah, ultimately though, I do hope that as maybe this NIL stuff will self-regulate, as Joe was saying on one of our last episodes, and that even with the bigger mega conferences, maybe those will turn into like maybe some subdivisions, and Michigan and Ohio State will stay in the same one, so that like that's always a guarantee on the schedule. Or if they adopt like this 3-5-5 idea that the ACC has, so that you're playing like the three same teams every year, hopefully that those rivalries end up staying in place. Yeah. But yeah, it's what makes college football different than NFL, right? It's like all the traditions.
And that's why we love it. And that's why I will always love College Game Day. I will always love, what I love about college football, Josh, is that I can go from a Friday night football game at my local high school. I can go to bed at like 12 o'clock at night, because that's usually when I got home. I wake up, watch College Game Day for 3 hours. I turn on the TV at noon, and I don't have to stop watching college football until 8 o'clock. Now that I'm in Hungary, it's usually like 5 a.m. But back when I was in high school, back when I was in college, that's what I love about college football. You can't argue anything with me to tell me that NFL has a better experience. You can't.
Right.
There's nothing like it.
We follow that up with like the win on Friday night, and then like you said, go in College Game Day. And for Ohio State fans, the majority of the time they're tuning in and they're coming off of a win. And then on Sunday they turn the Browns on, and then they watch that team lose, and then they cry, and then they go into Monday like with like this sad cloud above their head. And the NFL ruined them. That's why college football is superior, Ben.
That is true. And it's also why, Florida fans like Josh himself, they Friday night, his high school team loses, Florida then loses, and then he watches the Browns lose. So, I'm sorry. Wait, no, that's wrong.
We just are miserable down in the swamp. And that's also, I'm not going to lie. Like I say, I'm a Florida fan, but I love college football too much to waste my time watching some of these meaningless Florida games. Like if there's a bigger, high profile Big Ten matchup, like I'm going to watch that one. I'm sorry.
It's just, hey, it's the way it goes. It's the way it goes.
But like the world's largest cocktail party, like that Florida Georgia game, I'm always going to watch that. I'm always going to be tuning in, like in some capacity, to the Florida State game after that Michigan Ohio State game. But I'm not going to sit and watch Florida play Kentucky, if like Michigan is taking on Wisconsin, or if we got like a USC Oregon matchup. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Of course. And yeah, so anyways, we want to just say thank you for, I don't know, the last like week. I mean, we've been loading them, man. We've been putting out episodes for like the last week.
Can we actually
man.
right now, everybody like the video and comment thank you, Ben, for all the editing, the extra editing that he's been doing, because I got like overexcited about getting guests on, and I've booked all like these episodes like back to back to back. So Ben's been doing a lot more work than I have.
I will say, though, that we did say that we wanted to get this in before I was going to be gone. So those of you that don't know, I'm going to give you a little heads up. So this is the last episode you'll see me on for a week. So I will be off camp/vacation. That's like my only vacation, really, is camp. But I'll be off. It will be Josh, and I believe we have 2 co-hosts possibly. I won't announce who they are until we know for sure. But we have people coming on and joining Josh. He'll be taking over the show. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I'm worried. No, but anyways, it's going to be audio only, just to make life easier on both of our lives. It'll be audio only. I'll be posting that at the normal time that it always comes out, just so you know. But also, I want to give a big shout out to all of our guests from the last few episodes. Like, honestly, you guys have made it so much fun for us, for just you doing your effort of just getting our show out there. Thank you to all that have been watching from YouTube. I mean, our YouTube views, as well as who's been listening on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate that. And if you want to know what's going on more and more, make sure you check on our Instagram, which is @baseline.podcast. Go ahead and feel free to DM us there. Let us know like your thoughts. If you have any questions, or if you want to see some different content, let us know. We're always, as Josh has shown me, that he is more willing to just do some crazy things in a little amount of time that you give him. So no, but we're all excited for what's happening. We hope that you are excited as well. So make sure you, again, like he said earlier, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff on YouTube. And then make sure as well that you give us a star rating on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Boost it up, let more people hear about it, and then we can have more guests. Right, Josh? I mean, that's the best part, right? Is having more people than just us two talking all the time.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've been getting love from the Menace Army, from the Daily Wire, Training Company, Booster Club. Like, it's awesome. So I would like to continue to keep this train rolling.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that, once again, thank you guys so much. We appreciate everything that you guys do for us, and that's just literally watching or listening. So hopefully you guys have a great rest of your week. I'll see you in like a week and a half, but Josh will see you next week. So until then, we'll see you.